and the skills he acquired from the military were to be a soldier.
Yeah.
So, especially in that era, things like emotions like love, caring, or just expressing things that we may see more tender,
Yeah.
was a sign of weakness. So,
Mm.
so my father raised me as a soldier instead of a son.
Hello and welcome to Share.Care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello, John. How are you? How's Austin?
Oh, everything's great. Thank you for having me, Damien. We're hot here, but I still think it's probably cooler than Australia.
We have that reputation, don't we? It's hot. We got big bugs. We got big snakes, things that'll eat you whole, all that kind of stuff.
It seems like everything is super tough in Australia.
It is. I was slaving yesterday as I was mowing my lawn with my self-propelled lawnmower, going up and down. It was so tough. It was hard work.
Love that.
Yeah, we like to keep that perception. There's always a good. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, hey?
That's right.
Anyway, for the audience, I have John Petrelli here. Now, John was a fitness coach for over 30 years, having worked alongside some of Hollywood's biggest names and Grammy-Award-winning artists as well. And then in 2021, not too long ago, became an unexpected turn when he became paralyzed with Guillain-Barré Syndrome, GBS. Which is an immune disease that landed him paralyzed and in an ICU. Now, he also has, that wasn't the only trauma he's had in his life. He's had some earlier trauma as well, where he's had some run-ins with the police and learned what that's like as well. But then he went on to write the book, Confessions of a Hollywood Trainer. Welcome, John, to have you on the show. Do you want to tell us a little bit, when we're talking about being manly, let's delve into that, because there are a lot of guys feeling lost, lonely, and not useful in society. And I know guys tend to have stereotypically, we have a bit of rebelliousness in us. You want to tell us about that when you were younger, and what happened there with your run-in with the police and how that affected you?
Yeah, 100%, Damien. And I'm right on board with you. I think that we need attention to guys and what we're going through. And sometimes as men, whether right or wrong, we may not express our emotions as more as freely as other maybe women do, or, kids or whatever. So I think I'll take you all the way back to my childhood, because I think it's a direct tie-in to the things that you articulated so greatly. My being a trainer, traveling internationally and doing that for different celebrities, getting arrested, all of that, I think is rooted in what my childhood was like. Both of my parents were born in Italy. They were immigrants to America, and they came over first generation from Italy. My mom, God bless her, she's still alive. She's 4'10" of just absolute joy and cooking power.
I'm picturing
If you
this
come to my house,
stereotypical Italian mom. How much food do you get? How much
absolutely.
food do you get? Come on.
Oh, I'm telling you, my mother is real old world. She cures her own meats like sausage,
I
cavacol,
love
super
that.
sod. And any one time you could go in the basement of my mom's house in upstate New York, and there'll be 200 pounds of meat hanging from the ceiling. And
That's
that is
awesome.
not an exaggeration at all. So my mother is full of joy. God bless her. She showered us with love the best as she could. And then whatever I'm going to say about anybody in this story that's my journey is I take full responsibility for anything I did. People,
Mm,
we only have the tools we have to do what we can at the time in life that we have them. My dad was a great provider. I love him dearly. But he was born in 1921 and
mhm.
he grew up during the Depression. He got married a little bit later. And
Yeah.
my father served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Wow.
He, he didn't have a father, so the military was his father.
Mm,
And the skills he acquired from the military were to be a soldier.
yeah.
So, especially in that era, things like emotions like love, caring, or just expressing things that we may see more tender,
Yeah.
was a sign of weakness.
Mm,
So my father raised me as a soldier instead of a son.
right.
And so it wasn't until I was 21 years old that he ever called me son or said, I love you. And
Really?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't blame him for that. That's the way he grew up. But just our relationship together. And as I said, he was a great provider. He did many great things. But I
Mm,
was always yearning for his attention, his approval. He never came to see me in sports or anything of that nature. And I was
right.
very fearful of him,
Mm.
where be afraid to do something wrong is his private first class. And I'd be afraid to look stupid, right?
Yeah.
So over the
Sounds like my
years that
mother.
yeah, we only do the best we can, what we have.
Yep.
But over the years, that fear turned into anger, and then that anger turned into violence. And
Ooh.
unfortunately, I got in a lot of physical altercations as I came into my teens.
Mm,
And one thing that set the tone for my life is at 18. First off, I was a horrible student. I had dyslexia.
yeah.
Teachers passed me just so they would never have to see me again.
I think all guys have dyslexia, don't we? It's like I
I
think
think so.
I think we'd either be on the borderline, if not, crossed over, to be honest. We're just not paying
Right.
attention. Well, we're paying
Um,
attention to other stuff, you know?
Now, in Australia, do they have SATs? Do you
Yeah,
guys take
we
like a
have a different version of it. It's I've forgotten now. They only do it every second year. I've forgotten. My son did it recently, but I've forgotten one of those things. I have the Einstein principle. Einstein said, "Never remember what you can look up because it clogs up your thinking capacity." So I
I like that.
that's my excuse.
Well, we can look up everything today.
Fair enough too.
So the reason I bring that up is I was so bad in school that it's a thing like, what did you get on your SATs? I got a 1500, I got a 1200. And my friends used to say that I got marinara sauce on my SATs because I was eating pizza during the test and I failed so bad.
Oh no!
But
Wow.
that's how bad of a student I was.
Yeah.
And you combine that with the anger I had and some violent altercations when I was just out of high school, a thing that was a
Mm,
pivotal moment in my life, changed my life.
yeah.
It was this fight in the streets. And in a split second, I made a decision. Someone was going to strike one of my friends. I moved him out of the way and I struck that individual. And
Mm.
that person fell, went unconscious, and they cracked the back of their head open on the concrete.
Ow.
And in that melee, literally in a split second, my life started changing. And to
Mm.
make matters worse, I felt somebody grab me from behind. And I
Yeah.
thought it was someone attacking me.
Mm.
And unbeknownst to me, it was an undercover cop that had seen what happened and he put a handcuff on my wrist.
Uh-oh.
And I turned without thinking and I went to strike the undercover cop
Yeah.
with a handcuff flying on my wrist.
Right.
So literally in split seconds, my life changed from potentially going to college to having to
Mm.
go through the penal system to sitting in the back of the cop car and hoping and praying that this individual that I struck doesn't die.
Yeah.
And at that point in my life, Damien, my mentality was very selfish. I was,
Mm.
worried about what was going to happen to me. I wasn't even really concerned about that individual. I was blaming things
Mm.
outside of my control. It was
Yeah.
everybody else's fault.
Mm.
But the thing that happened in that moment was I started making a decision that I
Mhm.
wanted to give to society instead of take
Mm.
away from society. And I made a conscious decision that I was going to change my peer group. I don't blame my peers, but I wasn't strong enough mentally to handle the pressure and make proper decisions. And I
Yeah.
was going to change my geography. And once I worked my way through the court system and that person lived, I wish I could tell you it was the last incidents that happened, but it was a
Mm.
absolute turning point, and I decided to change my life, and I found my passion, my vocation of being a trainer and a coach.
Yeah.
And I called a friend. I had $500 in my pocket. I called a friend that lived in California, and I said, "I need. I'm either going to die or I'm going to end up in prison, and I need someone to help me." And he shed some light on me and said, "Look, I don't have any room, but in
Mhm.
my uncle's apartment, you can sleep on the floor." And so I packed my bags, and that was the
Mhm.
first time my father ever said he loved me. Was when I got on a plane. He called me son, and it breaks my heart to this. It's so, I mean, there's a lot of emotion tied to that. And I left with a couple $100 in my pocket in a suitcase, and I
Mhm.
started life at 21 years old and moved to California, where I thought I was going to go and help people. But
Mhm.
what I found out through this 30-year career is that the more I help people, I receive back tenfold in
Yeah.
what they helped me in my journey and how they helped craft my life and heal my soul and heal my heart. And more people that I helped on their journey, whether it was to be healthy, to get in shape, to be better at athletics, it advanced me as a better human being in caring, in listening, in contributing. And it really, if that thing which we can frame as being a bad thing that I did for sure, but if it didn't happen to me, it was a great thing that happened in my life, and it didn't happen to me, it happened for me. It happened for
Mm.
me so I could change. And from there, by the way, Damien, that's the longest I've ever talked without taking a break. I'm glad you can be part of that. I was just trying to get that out to you. But from there, my life changed, and I started this career, and we can get into that. But yeah, that's my backstory of how I got into what I've become.
Can we explore the difference, if you don't mind, between that moment? So when you're getting on the plane, I want to get into that as well. That
Mhm.
moment that you had with your dad, but because as you said, and a lot of young men out there have that experience where they're not taught to to express emotion, which I find ironic. I mean, you'll probably remember this as well. I've met, in the pre-show we talked about some of my sports that I like, which I should be American because I like NASCAR and should be a redneck. Um, I used to have a mullet years ago, but anyway, that's another story. But I want to go back to this because stereotypically they say, and I wonder whether that's just what the popular media talks about now. That all men don't cry is essentially what they're saying, and all men are taught that. But I was a big fan of the wrestling when I was a kid. The WWF, and I found recently, well, I didn't find, I kind of stumbled across it. There was the wrestler Macho Man Randy Savage, and yeah, his eyes light up. You know who I'm talking about. He
I'm
did,
a huge fan. I was a huge fan.
but it was interesting, and that's from the '80s, so that's 40 years
Yeah.
ago now.
Hmm.
Um, and there was an interview, and this was a video of an interview with Macho Man, and they asked him, "So, well, Macho Man, I mean, it's in your middle name, Macho. Does Macho Man cry?" And he goes, "Yeah, I cry all the time. I cry 1,000 times, and I cry 1,000 times more." When you look at that, I mean, and you look at your background, obviously you had a dad that brought you up, and I can understand that. My grandfather escaped from Polish, Ukraine, and Russian origin, um, mostly Polish, but and half Ukraine. Well, that doesn't add up. It's a quarter Ukraine. Like one of my granddads was Ukraine, two grandmothers were Polish, and my granddad on my dad's side was Polish and Russian, half half. Just to break that down for the annular retentives like me that want to do the math. That's how it breaks up. So I understand, that background that you had with your dad, but when you look at it, what was the difference between you know, then you mentioned about that you decided to give and help people. What was that focus when you were younger? You said you had fear of your dad, which turned to anger, which turned to violence. How did that, translate? Was it because, there wasn't that connection, there wasn't that talking with your dad? And I want to lead into how that, felt when you got on that plane.
Yeah. So as a child, my father, as I said, was raised by the military. So he had retired as a colonel. The only
Mhm.
thing above that is a general.
Yeah.
And his word was final. So no one was really allowed to put input in, or you weren't allowed to give your two
Mm,
cents, add your
right.
creativity to it. And if you question anything, you were immediately shut down.
Right.
And so it just kind of stifled who I was. I saw my mother live underneath that oppressive hand too. And so if we don't allow human beings to express themselves, if we don't allow men, women to express themselves, that energy has to go somewhere. For me, it just got bottled up inside. It got bottled up inside
Mm,
as fear. I was always fearful of doing something wrong. And if you walk around in fear of doing something wrong, you'll never be able to reach your highest self, to be
yeah.
free, to make a mistake. And so, you know, as kids, I believe we do what we see and we emulate what our environment is and what we see.
Yeah.
So I saw my father doing these things, and even though I didn't appreciate them, some of those traits came on to me. And
What
as
were
a
those
young man,
traits? I
like
mean,
I didn't cry
yeah.
probably from the time I was 16 until maybe I was 25.
Mm,
I can't remember crying in that time at all. But now I
mm,
cry so much that I've gone 180 degrees. I make up for all of that. I cry when my kids are watching Disney movies.
mm.
So
Yeah, I
it
did that in the
was,
Cars movie in the cinema with my son. I mean, we're in the
yeah.
cinema and I'm bawling my eyes out.
And meanwhile, my wife is over there is like, "What are you crying about?"
Well, I mean, have you seen the end of Terminator when he gets lowered into that molten blood? So sad.
Uh, of course, he's getting lowered down edge. Yes.
Exactly. He's
Yeah.
dying. He's sacrificing himself. It's a sad moment. I can cry. So
Oh,
you had that experience with your dad, though. As you say, your dad didn't show that emotion,
mhm.
but it doesn't sound like it wasn't the showing emotion component that built up. It was more that you weren't able to express what you needed to express. You weren't able to have those conversations. Is that more the case, or was it that you just weren't allowed to cry?
It's part of the case. He never told me I couldn't cry. I
Yeah.
just saw that because he saw it as weakness and never verbalized that he saw it as weakness, but I just saw and I was emulating my father.
Well,
And when
did
he
he
told
though? This is I'm gonna because I was posted to the SAS here, which is the Australian Special Forces, so your Navy SEALs, Green Berets.
me, mhm,
What I found interesting in these conversations, and because again I referenced Randy Savage, so I grew up with
mhm,
that without realizing it at the time. And then when I was at the SAS, all the people I associated there with, A, could ask for help, B, could express emotions when they needed to. And I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I'm thinking back, I don't remember what was on there. But everybody, because I had to do it as well, we did a psychological test. And my guess was at that level, because you can't do that job for any length of period of time if you can't deal with it's emotionally stressful. You need to be able to ask for help. You need to be able to deal with those emotions. So you've got to be able to talk about it. So I'm guessing that the psychological test that was done beforehand was to test for um, that personality type that someone could do that. And that's where I'm wondering from your perspective, was it a case that your dad didn't he had a way of processing things where he could
mhm.
deal with that because there's times, times that we need to do things. And I don't know, I'm asking the question. Um, but you just interpreted that as you weren't able to. Because I want to link that to when you got on the plane to your dad. What happened there? What was the difference there? Because
I
he
you
said that
know,
I love you.
I can't answer for him. And
Yeah.
our relationship became closer as he aged and I got older and I actually moved away. I think because he didn't have a father,
Mm.
and from 18 he went into the military, and we're talking about 1930s, okay? He
Yeah.
was born in 1921. So maybe it was a different perspective then, but I think his main thing was, this is how I'm going to make my son, my boy, into a man.
Mm.
And so when he saw that I went off on my own, maybe in his heart, in his consciousness, he was like, okay, this is his first step of being a man. I'm kicking him, or he's leaving the nest. And
Mm.
maybe that softened his heart a little bit. to be vulnerable and say, I love you. And it hit me
Mm.
to my core. Those simple words absolutely crushed me to the point where I couldn't even return in response because I couldn't even muster a voice when he said that. It just
Yeah.
crushed me. And I remember it as vivid as, to this day, many, many years later.
Mm. I wonder from that side of things, because I look at it and they say the boy doesn't become a man until his father dies, because that's when he actually starts to make his own decisions, moves under that shadow. And
Mhm.
from my perspective, my dad died a long time ago, but metaphorically still alive. But he died over a packet of chips for me. I was living with my dad. I was in between houses. I'd sold one house and was buying another, but it didn't work out. So I was living with my dad, and my dad's quite frugal. And I'd bought my own groceries, and I'd bought some, and this is not a plug, but I bought Pringle chips just to put that in context. He buys no names stuff. And I'm in the kitchen eating these Pringles chips, and he walks in and he says, "What did you buy them for? They're expensive." Now, I didn't get defensive, as I normally would have. I didn't get, justify it. I didn't do anything. I just no, it wasn't even confidently. It was just as me. I just said I like them without justification, without defensiveness, without anything. I just said I like them. And he goes, "Yeah, but they're expensive." And I said, "Yeah, but I like them." And it was almost, I can still feel it today. It was like this, this feeling, and he just went, "Huh," and walked away, and that changed our relationship. It was almost like he goes, "Okay, you know how to make your own decisions now."
Mm.
And I'm just wondering from that perspective, is that a father-son thing? Because I've got a 14-year-old son myself now, and
Mhm.
I'm very much conscious of giving him his space to make his own decisions. As I tell him, so if you screw it up, and then you can't blame me when you're with a psychiatrist and saying, "Oh, my dad repressed me all the time." He'll probably go the
Right.
opposite and say, "My dad didn't tell me what to do." But either way, um, you know. But I'm just wondering again, if when you look at your relationship with your dad, even though, I mean, maybe he didn't have that skill, but I'm just wondering whether, because if we're to survive in life, if we have that little bit of pressure, and I wonder about that with kids now with participation trophies and things like that, sometimes life can be a little bit tough. We've got to know when to stand up and just suck it up and get on with
Mhm.
it, and when we can express those emotions. And I'm just wondering if your dad was in that phase as well, because it was kind of something similar to what I was experiencing with my dad.
It could be, and if I look back at it, Damien, is I'm grateful for everything that happened because I can't go back and change it. I
Mm,
can't go back and change it, so it doesn't do me any good to harbor any ill will towards that my
yeah.
childhood. And I've become quite successful in helping people in my career and having a family and all these different facets of my life, and I've learned a lot.
Mm,
And so under that pressure, yeah, I is the thread of who I am. So I
mm,
have to be grateful for it.
yeah.
Um, yeah, as we look back, make me think about it for sure. And you had mentioned the epiphany moment with your father and the Pringles. And I
Mm,
would say somewhere in my late 20s, I think I had something similar with my dad. I was on the West Coast and he was on the East Coast. And he actually started asking for my advice on different things. And it had to do in
yeah.
the financial realm. And I remember specifically
Yeah.
when he asked, and I was like, wow, this has never happened. And that was like,
Mm,
I believe he believed that I had earned kind of the right to sit at the table.
yeah. Because I've had that experience with my dad as well, where he asked me for advice now.
Mm.
And it's what I wonder from that perspective is, when we look back at the dads, as much as, because I think there is, for me, and this is my personal opinion, that, I mean, I can ask for help, and I have done for, for what I think it was because when I was a kid, my dad would take me to play golf and lawn bowls with him, and then he got sick of me, so he'd send me off with the other guys, and no, he didn't. I don't think he got sick of me, but I joke about that. But I would, so we'd go. I initially went with my dad and any social club that he played with, but then I would be off with three other guys, so I'd be part of a four, and I'd spend through 4.5 hours around walking around a golf course with these 3 other guys, and it would change every week because it was every week we went out and played golf, and I'd have all these different guys, and then afterwards, you know, they'd meet in the club room, then I'd be having a drink and I'd be having my lemonade, but I'd be around all these older people. And being the young kid, I was always asking questions. So I think I grew up with that ability, and I had all these role models, so to speak. I didn't think about it that way at that time. But I'm just wondering from that perspective, is that, you know, having that even they had that toughness about them as well, you know, but they could, listening, when I think about the conversation, don't remember anything specifically, but there was a camaraderie between them where they could talk about things, because I vaguely remember them talking about things that they were going through and stuff like that, and as a collective they were expressing that. And I just wonder if we do that differently to what, you know, is kind of the standard expectation of conversation, and men just do that slightly differently. Is that, you know, what's your experience with that, with conversation between men?
You know, yeah, I think the conversation between men depends on the dynamic of the relationship between those men, right?
Mm,
So my dynamic with my father was different. He saw me in a different light, and I saw
mm,
him and told him a certain dynamic. And you and I have a certain dynamic, and those guys at the golf club have a certain dynamic, right?
mm,
So it depends on where we are in that relationship, where our ego is in regards to the people we're around, where our ego is in regard to our own perspective of oneself, how comfortable we are with ourselves. So I feel like the more comfortable you are with yourself and who you are, the more
mhm,
self love you have for yourself, the more
yeah,
open you can be and be vulnerable. You know, I find there's power in being able to explore all different emotions and allowing yourself to be vulnerable.
yeah. That was the other thing Macho Man said, Randy Savage, was that a man should experience the full range of emotions. Again, this was in the 80s. I'll send
Well,
you the
I'm a
clip.
huge Macho Man
I'll
fan.
send you
I
that
never
clip.
saw this
It's
interview.
insane. And maybe I'll put it in here for the viewers as well at the end of this podcast. But that was the interview. It was very short. It goes for, you know, 20 seconds, where he says, "I've
Mhm.
cried 1,000 times and will cry again." And a man should experience the full range of emotions. All in, I think, in one sentence. It's insane. And so I wonder about that when we go, okay, because when I'm thinking about your dad as well, as much as he didn't show it, because I reference pop culture a lot, and I love the scene in U571 with Harvey Keitel and Matthew McConaughey, and you know, Matthew McConaughey's just become the captain of the ship because the captain died. And then Harvey Keitel says, you know, "Can I speak freely, sir?" And he goes, "Of course, chief." He says, "Well, don't you ever say what you said to the men just then? I don't know. Those words will kill a crew." And I just wonder from that perspective. And then obviously your dad had a very, very strong military background. But when you're a leader, and I know there's a lot out there that says, you know, leaders should, you know, do that. But I mean, I know from my perspective, if I'm looking at a leader and one leader says, "I don't know what to do," and another leader says, "Look, we're going to work this through," very different words.
Mhm.
And so I'm just wondering from that perspective, do you think that might have been part of what your dad was doing, was leading you from that perspective and going, "Hey, out in the world, it's going to be tough," you know, especially when you look at what he's gone through and you look at what the, you know, Ukrainian soldiers are going through at the moment. There's times
Yeah,
where you've got to just draw the line and go, "Hey, I might need to get help later, but right now I just need to move forward."
sure. You know, I have this dynamic with my wife where sometimes she can get frustrated with me. Believe it or not, I'm not perfect for sure. But in times of high tension or a crisis or something, I take it, and I know I got this cue from my dad. It's like, it's nothing personal. This needs to be done right now. And I had that so much in every day of my life as a child and
Mm,
growing up, that like, you have to do this. It has to be done now. Don't question anything. And we need a sense of urgency.
mm,
So I always lived in a sense of urgency as a child. I always had that as an undertone. But now I've been able to hopefully craft it where I can have that sense of urgency, and this has to be done right now, but it's directly tied to something that's urgent, not just
mm.
every moment of my life is that way. So there
Yes.
is these ebbs and flows, right? But
Mm,
that's so true that we need to have that part, right? We need to, the world is a cruel place out there, and you're only going to be making improvements if you're, number one, allowed to fail, right? Getting feedback that this isn't working right. And number two, actually fail or get feedback that this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So as an adult, I try to give my kids, okay, it's okay to fail. It is
Mm.
okay. In fact, if you're not putting yourself out there enough that you're playing it so safe that you don't fail, then we have to go ahead and expand a little bit. You got to be
Mm.
comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that okay to fail is really important. And that's where I wonder from that side of things, have we gone too far with, everyone gets a trophy, whether you've put in any effort in or not?
100% we have.
Yeah.
I believe 100% because that's not real life,
Mm.
right?
If there's
No
one
one is
job position and there's 10 people going for it, not 10 people are going to get a job.
That's correct. That's correct. And you got to be okay with it, right? You put in the
Mm.
work you put in, work as diligently as you can consistently.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it, as long as you can look back and say, I did everything I could, then it's out of your hands.
And there's other
You got to be
factors
okay
that
with it.
play into that too. You don't know what's going on at the other end. I remember there was one job that I wanted so badly. I wanted to work in corporate recovery, and this organization looked fabulous. The beautiful office looked amazing. I walked out of that interview thinking, I've nailed this. Then I
Mhm.
got the phone call, and it was like, no, you didn't. And I'm like, ah. So after drowning my sorrows, back when I used to drink, um, I eventually picked myself up and I got a job, and I actually got a job with another firm, which it turned out the firm that I got a job with, the partners of that firm, the two guys that ran that, they were from a massive, big firm, well respected, highly intelligent, wonderful people to work with, very encouraging. The firm that I didn't get the job for were known as Dodgy Brothers. Now, and it was a small industry. I was working corporate recovery, so it was like Richard Gere. I had hair back then, but that was it. We were taking over companies, selling them off, breaking them up, that kind of stuff. And but had I got that original job, I would have got tainted with that experience. I would have been seen as a dodgy person without even having been there. So sometimes you've got to wonder, think about it from that perspective of going, well, is this serving me in some way? Which most likely is.
Right. I mean, have you thought about it, Damien? You were not supposed to get that job because
Mm,
if every door is open and you're not going to walk down the hall and open a door that's meant for you, you were
mm,
meant to go to that other place.
mm,
So, we touched upon in the beginning when you had given my intro about this 30-year career and everything. And
mm,
from a small farm town where I was mucking horse stalls, baling hay, a town of 2,000 people, to going to California, becoming this new trainer at 21, to working. I traveled internationally.
mm.
I worked with artists traveling all over the world, being on 130 flights a year. And I say that not to toot my own horn, but I want people to understand that I had dyslexia. I got arrested. I went through the court system.
Yeah.
Teachers passed me just because they didn't want to see me anymore. But yet I was able to accomplish things by focusing, by surrounding myself with not people that necessarily always agreed with me, but that would give me their perspective
Mm.
and help make me better. And through hard work day in and day out, and if I can do that with all my limitations, literally your world is endless. You can do anything, whether you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an actor, an athlete. If you're willing
Did
to
you have
put
to
in the
put
work,
lawyer in there?
yes, you can do anything, anything.
But tell us about that. Okay, let's move to that part of the journey now. Where you are, and you probably don't realize this because I didn't set it up right at the start. But you've jumped in what we call the Wayback Machine. This is a silver DeLorean that Doc Brown invented, and you've hit 88 miles an hour. We're traveling through
I
time.
know it. My
So let's look
wardrobe
at
is
this.
still in that era.
Yeah, you've moved to the East Coast. You're living on a floor. What was that journey like? I mean, again, for the people listening there, and I think we forget when we grow, and I don't know who does this research, but people do. Apparently, when we learn to walk, we try and fail 8,000 times on average. So some more, some less. What was that like from that perspective when you went out there? Did you go to Hollywood and all of a sudden the stars jingled and everything fell into place? Tell us that story. What happened? You're on the floor, sleeping on the
Yeah.
floor. What
So
was
I'm
that
sleeping on
journey
the
like
floor.
to 100 and something flights, 130 flights? which is
So there's a
cool. And
lot
I
of
don't think you should downplay that. I've had the good fortune of flying to Venice, not Venice, Nice, and a private helicopter taking me and my family to Monaco. It's cool. It's cool to do those
amazing.
things. It's not. I
Yeah.
mean, if it's say it was solely fulfilling, no, but it's fun. It's. But tell us about you're on the couch. You're on the floor.
Yes. And
Was that
so,
simple? All of a sudden, all the doors open, or what did you have to do?
no, sir, it's wild. As I said, my soul started healing as I helped other people, but there's a lot of time in between there. I start researching to be a trainer. There's like one test in the nation at that time to get a certification to be a trainer.
Yeah.
I'm working landscaping on the side. The person that gave me a room in their house to sleep on the floor, God rest his soul, helped save my life. He was in AA at the time, and so our house he would give back. And our house was always filled with people transitioning out of AA. So I had
Wow.
people that had different drug addictions and everything living with us. But
Oh,
for
wow.
me, it was a sanctuary because I could take a breath of fresh air. It was newness. I wanted a new start. Damien, my ego was so fragile before I had got to that place that I had to keep up a persona as a tough guy and get in all these fights. And I had to fulfill what I thought other people's perspectives were of me. And now I could let that go. And now I could be who my essence truly was.
So talk
And
about that perspective, and this is where, because I want to link this back to what your dad, what you experienced with your dad, because it's perception and reality. When we watch a James Bond movie, for example, and we see him, he talks to two girls, and he's successful with those in the 2 hours, which covers multiple days anyway.
Right.
So we've seen him talk to 2 girls, and he was successful with those 2 girls. But we go, oh, he's successful with all the girls, and I relay that to an experience I had with a guy that I was in the army with. He was a good-looking guy, but he wasn't too bright. In my mind anyway, but he was always dating these amazing women. They were hot, they were sexy, they were intelligent, they were doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. I shouldn't mention lawyers. I joke with lawyers. I work with a lot of them. They were kind, and so I'm going, and so I asked him one day, and I literally said this. I said, Shane, you're not that bright. How is it that you're dating all these gorgeous women? And he didn't flinch at the not bright comment at all. He just put his arm around my shoulder, turned into Yoda or Obi-Wan, or who, choose your wise sensei, whatever. And he said, Damien, what you don't see is I ask a lot. Most of them say no. You just see the ones that say yes. And this perception that you were talking about when you were there in that room and you this perception that you had to be this tough guy. Do we often misconstrue that with reality and just we've got this perception that we think is how the world is or what's happening, but we're not really paying attention to the reality, partly probably because we didn't ask the question like I did of Shane.
Yeah, 100%. Our perception may not be a reality in actuality, right? But it is, for me, it fed my ego. And then when you start feeding what's that?
Didn't when you look back, I mean, yes, because I've done that. I've projected, I'm this hugely, successful person when I wasn't, but I knew I was being fake. And then
I
when
didn't have the awareness at that time to know I was being. I did a little bit, man. That's a great point, because in my mentality, I knew that I should be doing something different. But
that's what I mean.
In my persona, it was addictive. I was addicted to the fact that people had a perception of me.
Yeah. So what was that like?
Sure.
Talk that through that experience.
So
when you look back at it now, though.
When I look at it now, well, back then I would get into so many altercations, and it's tied into so many different things. If I saw anybody that was a bully, then I immediately related to my dad's relationship, and I felt I was bullied. So I would have to justify getting involved because I wanted to vanquish the bullies. And so I'm like, man, I'll teach you what a bully is. And so I would put myself in that case. And then it just keeps feeding, and then people get known to be a tough guy. And then I was getting pulled into things that I had no direct connection to anymore. People would come and see me, can you help us out? And it just kind of snowballed and manifested itself. I didn't say it earlier, but embarrassingly, the last thing that ever happened, and it's in my book, That was a final straw. There was a melee in the street in the winter, and there were so many people fighting in the streets, the snowplows had to stop, and they couldn't proceed, and there were people knocked out. And
Wow.
then I won't ever give who this was, but somebody had pulled, which is crazy, a chainsaw out of the trunk of their car
Oh
and
my
pulled the
God.
chainsaw and started a chainsaw. And my mind always goes two places now
Wow.
when I hear chainsaws. Number one, that incident, and Scarface.
Yeah.
And the chainsaw, going after people with a chainsaw, wasn't me, but it was someone in my peer group. At that time, if there were cameras and people had cell phones, this person, their life would have been over and possibly should have been. And that was my final straw. That was the culmination of what something that crazy had to stop for me to cut this addiction off.
Mm.
And you had brought up some other parts. You said, what did you learn laying on that floor and everything? My life didn't get easy automatically. When I moved to California, in the first 6 months, I got hit by a municipal truck that T-boned me, and I got laid up. And then I got what is called E. coli poisoning, and I went to the hospital. I got E. coli. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a very severe form of food poisoning.
Yeah.
And my mom had no money. I came out of the hospital. My mom sent me a check for $500. My sister sent me a check for $300. And I made a definitive decision as a 21-year-old that I was never going to cash those checks, either ignorantly or out of ego. And I said, if I'm not a man enough to make my own bones right now, I don't deserve to be out here. And I still have those checks tucked away in my scrapbook. And that is when I made a definitive decision in that moment, one of my lowest points, to go, hey, whatever comes, I'll be able to deal with it. I was able to deal with all this stuff and make it through. What happens now when I start doing good things and good things start coming my way? So it wasn't like I was just skipping and whistling from the time I got there and laid on the floor to becoming successful.
So how did you do that? Because a lot of people say, I've done good things, but good things don't come back. It doesn't sound like, that happened for you immediately, but you seem to have that mindset that you were going to make a difference. Why?
Yeah.
What was the thinking there?
Yeah, so I think it's similar to your friends thinking. You got to ask a lot of girls for two to say yes in a 2-hour movie, right?
Exactly.
I knew what the alternative was. If I gave up and went back, the repercussions were so great that it didn't matter what came my way. I was going to will it into being a success. And I didn't even know how to define success at that point, but I was just going to continue no matter what. I had burned the bridges. I had burned the boats.
Yeah. So it became there was no alternative. Like you said, you burnt the boats, like that famous general. I can't remember that off the top. We talked about Einstein principle before. I'll look it up later. But it did. So it had to get that painful to go, okay, there's no other option. A friend of mine, a business partner that I have, she has the phrase, you learn through pain until you learn to learn through joy.
I love that.
Yeah, she's amazing. It's like, it's like, but we get to that point, isn't it? And is it for you as well that you had to learn through that there was that much pain before you actually woke up and said, I need to change? Because I'm wondering if that's a difference.
For me, it was. Yes, but I'm a firm believer, Damien, that you don't have to hit rock bottom in order to change.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, but the difference being is, when do you wake up and say, I need to change? Because that was the shift that you made, if I heard you correct. The shift was, I need to do something different. Not the world needs to change, not, these people need to treat me differently or whatever. What I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, that shift was, you need to change, and that's where that changed. Is that right?
100%. I took accountability for myself. I took accountability for my success or failures. And there were a lot of failures, which end up being my successes. And literally my life, if you look at it, it is a culmination of failures and feedback that I need to change this, I need to do this, I need to improve here. And I was allowed to fail. I continued to fail. But for me, failure is not the end of the road. It's just feedback onto what you need to do to proceed forward to get what you want. We can't open every door. The doors that we're supposed to open will be there for you. Yeah. So if somebody tells me I'm not good at basketball, great. What's my real passion? Maybe it's being over here and being an accountant. But if I wasted a ton of time on being in basketball, I would have never found that. They're all
Yeah.
gifts.
So from that perspective of, you getting you're on the floor, you've realized you need to change. It's all you.
Mm-hmm.
And so regardless of what happens now, it's you. And I want to
Mm-hmm.
come, because I think life is pretty easy. The principles to succeed in life is pretty easy. And I'm going to put this because it's contrary to what is a lot of work out there. My son's sensei, my son does karate.
Mm-hmm.
His sensei's a 7th Dan black belt. We're having that discussion that hard or easy is reflective of your level of skill. And I said to him, you're a 7th Dan black belt. If I asked you to do grading at a yellow belt level, how hard would it be? And he said, it'd be easy. I said, that's my point. So from that perspective, when you look at those struggles and things that you went through, how much of that was your own skill or lack thereof that caused the problems?
Some of it was definitely my lack of skill, for
Yeah.
sure. Not being able to read properly, not having dyslexia. So
Yeah.
that's a challenge. But at the end of the day,
just a little bit. But
at
yet
the
you
end
wrote
of
a
the day,
book.
right? And that's a great point. And at the end of the day, you can either let those things stop you, or you can let them be part of the fabric of your damn Superman cape if you want it to be, right? To inspire
Yeah.
other people.
Explain the Superman
Because
cape. I love that term.
I never said that before in my life. I just made that up right here.
But it come from somewhere. Where did it come from? Let's explore
I
that.
don't know. It came from up there, brother.
Oh, okay.
But
So that's it. I
literally,
love that. Your damn Superman cape. That's cool.
coin it and use it.
It's
I think
yours,
more
sir.
people need
I
to
will
hear
give
it.
you credit for that. It's yours.
All
But
right, brother.
I am going to use it, but I'll give it. I'll give you credit for it.
So,
But you have to find your Superman cape. Isn't that what it's about? Where did you? So I hear it is your place, your source of strength. We have that in share.care. One of the principles is to find your source of strength. Now, whether that's, God music, I do gumping. I've got a big lawn here at the beach house. And as I mentioned before, I got a self-propelled lawnmower. I go out there and I literally go up and down the lawn. Like Forrest, sometimes it doesn't even need to be mowed. I just need my space. So I'm Forrest Gump going up and down his gumping.
yeah, I love that.
But how do you, from that, having your Superman cape, how did you find that source of strength inside you?
It's changed as I've changed as an individual. So at one point, as I said, it was all about me not wanting to fail, maybe having shame again of failing. Then it became, hey, I brought other people into this world. My source of strength is my kids and my wife. So as it's changed, I've changed. When I got paralyzed and I was in the hospital and I could only move my eyeballs. Now, from someone that is literally their whole identity is my physicality, my source of strength was God for me. It was, I want to inspire people that may end up in a similar situation to let them know that they can change their circumstances. So as my life has changed and grown, my source of strength has grown with it too, and changed and wove its way into different places. A lot of source of strength for me is getting up and like, who am I going to help today? I don't know who that person is. They're out there. It could be someone that was like me from a small town. It could be anybody, but it's out there.
What I'm hearing when you're talking and you're talking about the past is you mentioned about how you were avoiding things. So you didn't want to be this, you didn't want to be that. And now when you're talking about things in the future or presently, it's about actually where you're going. Like, how can I help people? And I'm wondering from that perspective, did that shift get easier for you when your mindset shift? Because if I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, you have to think of it. That's how your mind works. You've heard that before. It's your reticular activating system tells you what to focus on. And we've all done this. We've said, I don't want to forget this, or whatever it is. And you go, don't forget to take the rubbish out. And all of a sudden then you wake up in the morning and you're running out because the garbage truck's coming. And, you forgot it. Whereas if you had said, I will remember this, it's slightly different, but makes a massive difference. Now, what I'm hearing from what you're talking about, when you were younger, it seemed to be you want to not do things. But now when you're talking about you want to do things, slight difference. Is that, when you think about that, does that make a difference in how your life was more difficult or easier?
Yeah, words have power.
Yeah.
And my younger self, I was reactive. In
Mm.
my adult self, I'm proactive. I
Uh,
get up every morning. First thing I do is have a couple glasses of water, and then I meditate. I do Wim Hof breathing, and I meditate every day for 12 minutes. And then I
wow.
say my prayers, my affirmations, and then I do some type of physical activity, whether that's jujitsu, going swimming. And I give some time to myself, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, before I go and help other people. And then I
Mm.
go, okay, this is what I'm looking to achieve today. I'm going to help this amount of people. I'm going to see this person. And so now I have a proactive perspective on what my next 24 hours look like, my next 48 hours, my next week, what I'm trying to achieve. When before,
Mm.
everything was reactive. That person did this to me, or this person or that teacher failed me, or whatever. And now I'm looking
Mm.
like I'm more apt to react if I have to in a positive manner, as a
Mm.
because I'm taking care of what needs to be taken care of ahead of time, and I'm being proactive in what my focus is.
How do you do that? I mean, you've gone along and, you had some shitty stuff happen, but like you said, now you recognize that you probably caused some of that.
Mhm.
Um, but even then, now you're doing all this great stuff, and then in 2021 you become paralyzed. How do you
Yeah,
have that proactive focus when you're just like, "Oh, come
yeah.
on, do I need another one?"
So 2021, December 2021, I started having these ailments and my feet started going numb. And I didn't
Mhm.
tell anybody. I didn't tell my wife. Couldn't feel my feet for about a week. And then I would wake
Wow.
up early in the morning, and the only thing that would relieve the pain was ice baths. I started taking ice baths. I'm working 12, 14-hour days. And then my hands and my fingertips started going numb. And then all of a sudden, I woke up one morning and my urinary stream was gone and I couldn't really see. My vision started going. And so
Wow.
I finally sit down with my wife and I go, baby, this is what's going on. I've been too proud to tell you this. When I get home from work tonight, we're going to maybe go see the doctor. And my
Mm.
wife, thank God bless her, she goes, no, we're going to see the doctor today. You're not going to work. You can't feel your feet. So we went to the doctor, and
Mm.
I went to a urgent care, and I ended up fainting in urgent care. I went unconscious in urgent care.
Oh,
And
wow.
they started giving me these tests, and they go, look, we don't want to scare you, but we think you may have this rare autoimmune disease, and we don't have the ability to test. We want to send you to the hospital down the street where they have the ability to take a spinal draw. They're going to take fluid out of your spine,
Mm.
and they're going to find out what's going on. Damien, my body was like a battery, a double A battery that just was getting drained. And then pretty soon it was tough to stand. And then I couldn't squeeze someone's hand. And then I was having trouble just raising all happening rapid pace.
Mm.
So I get into the hospital and they take this test, and it's going to be a little time for them to find the results. And they
Mhm.
wheelchair me to the ICU. And as I'm going to the ICU, I see all these other people in rooms, and I
Mm.
know that a lot of them are not going to make it out of there. And
Right.
that point, I made a definitive decision in my mind that I would never complain once. I would never say, why is this happening to me? I would
Mm.
never, ever, ever, ever go in a negative spot in my mind. And I set myself up what I believe was for success. And I believe, from what has happened to me and how I've recovered, it worked. I
Mm.
filled my room, and I didn't care how crazy anybody thought I was, with positive vibrations. For me, that's Bob Marley. I turned on the
I
music and I
love it.
left
That's
it
awesome.
going
Yeah.
24/7. I had my
Yeah.
wife go, and God bless her, I had no more swallow. I couldn't swallow anymore, so I had to have everything pureed. She went home and made me pureed food, organic
Mhm.
vegetables and everything, so I can nourish my body on a cellular level. And
Wow.
then I started meditating and praying, and whether it had effect or not, I'm
Mm.
not discounting Western medicine. The doctors were amazing. They did so much to help me. But I started praying, and I started visualizing my body healing itself. And I
Mhm.
started asking my body to heal itself. Then I started politely telling it, and then I demanded my body to heal itself. This is over the course of 10 days where I was paralyzed.
Yeah.
And so eventually, I mean, with my mindset, with the help of the doctors, there's a lot that goes in between that. I went unconscious again. They gave me tests for hour and 45-minute CT scans and MRIs. I soiled myself in the hospital. There were many times I couldn't even get up to go use the bathroom where I could have gone, what the hell is happening to me? Why is this happening to me? But I just said I would never do that because the lady next door in the room doesn't have, she's older than I am. She may not have the support I may have. She may not have the faith I have. And who am I to complain when she's going through that? Somebody has it worse.
Yeah.
And so after 10 days, they brought me out of the ICU. I started to regain movement. I graduated into getting into a wheelchair. They sent me home in a wheelchair. I started doing, this doesn't happen by a magic wand. I knew I had to do a ton of work. I started physical therapy 5 days a week, every day, and then 2 days on my own. And I started moving my fingers, and then I started squeezing my hand. And when I should have been sleeping, my wife is like, why aren't you sleeping? I had a walker, and I was trying to take steps until I eventually graduated to using a walker, then a cane, and then being fully functional again. It took me 4 months every day, nonstop. But I got it back, and I just feel blessed and grateful. And the person with dyslexia that can't do any, if I wasn't given this opportunity of having this happen for me, I would have been back to work working. I wrote a book because of this. I've never written anything in my life. I heard a book that was inspirational to me when I was laid up listening to an audiobook. I contacted them and said, I have a story. And I started writing, typing, and they were gracious enough to have me send them my story. And as soon as they got it, they said, please send us some more. And they got another chapter. And they said, send us some more. And the guy that was the editor said, look, I just finished the book. I promised myself I was going to take 6 months off. I'm exhausted, but I want to do this with you. And if that didn't happen to me, I would have never in my life written a book. And now I have people call me from the East Coast, from the West Coast, from Cleveland, and go, man, my mother was afflicted with the same disease. My uncle's in the hospital with the same thing. Can you give us some pointers? So it's been a blessing. I'm glad I got paralyzed. I wouldn't be talking to you, brother, if that didn't happen.
Wow. Because the doctors do say that if you're in that critical situation, what largely makes a difference is that mental attitude. And was it for you, was it looking at other people and going, okay, it could be worse, so I need to be grateful?
That's a huge part of it. Also, part of it was the love I have for my family. I said, my kids are not going to be fatherless. My wife is not going to be husbandless. And people I don't know, I said that I have to help. I said they're out there, and I'm gonna contribute in some way. So there was a lot of facets to it, but that was a huge part of it.
So you made it bigger than yourself.
Yeah, I put it out there so I didn't have time for my body and my mind to go in a negative state about woe is me, what's happening to John Petrelli, why is this happening to me?
So now when you look at John Petrelli today compared to that kid that was getting into fights, is that one of the key differences that how can you leave the world a better place?
It's an absolute difference, man. I'm here as living proof that we need to contribute. We need to be outside of ourselves. No one person can do it on its own. I can't give my story without you being gracious enough to invite me on your show, right? I can't do a book without somebody going, hey, man, we love your story. I'm an editor. You put the words together. I'll help you massage them in editing a book. We're human beings. We need love. We need to contribute. We need to be challenged. We need to be able to ask questions. We need to be able to fail, man. We need to have all these things. So yes, that is the difference between the immature John Petrelli and the John Petrelli right now that knows I don't know everything. I want to continue to learn. I want to continue to grow. And I want to allow myself to continue to be challenged and fail in the face of those challenges and overcome them.
Tell me about the asking questions side of things. From that perspective, what was that transition for you to realizing that you don't know everything?
Man, life just hit me in the face, over and over. Because at one point, my questions were, why me? Well, I was asking questions. I was asking horrible questions.
Yeah.
Right? And
my questions generally suck, but that's another story. We can do a whole podcast on that.
So I just changed the questions, and I so encourage, I coach my son's baseball team. I so encourage questions because I am going to learn from your question. I am going to learn something. And if I don't learn something, maybe somebody else that was afraid to ask the question but had it in their head is going to learn. And we can only hope to grow. We're either dying or we're growing. Nothing stays the same.
Mhm.
So I choose to grow.
What about this asking questions thing? Let's explore that a little bit more. From
Yeah.
that perspective, because if you're asking questions, firstly, when you've got to be willing to ask questions, but if you're at that state, because a lot of times, even when people ask questions, and I'm probably, the most arrogant prick there was out there when I was younger, I'd even ask questions, and then while the person's starting to give me an answer, I'm already thinking of something else to say, or that I've already answered it for them. I'm not really listening. How
Mm,
important is it from that perspective? And not just to listen with your ears, but to listen with your whole being.
yeah. So important because we got to give people a safe space where, and I don't even like that word safe space, but you got to give an environment where people feel comfortable asking a question, and you have to be open enough to listen with every part of your being.
Well, from that perspective, though, when we talk about being manly, and I know it probably applies to women too, but that's the title of the show. When you talk about safe spaces, and we get that a lot, where, and then I had that experience where we were filming um, in one of the organizations. We were filming people. We had two prominent psychologists. We had a dinner party. We set it up deliberately to film and ask these questions about how to deal with situations. And I noticed that, because I was directing it, I noticed that the men started to do a lot of the talking. And I got concerned because, coming from a corporate background, I'm thinking, okay, accusations of men dominating the conversation. So I went to the women that were off camera, because we had more people than we had seats at the table. And so we rotated people in. And I said, I'm getting worried because the men are doing all the talking, and I don't want them to be dominating the conversation. And they all stood up, all the women stood up and said, no, we never hear men talking about that. And I was wondering from that perspective. Initially, it was a light bulb moment. I'll give men a safe space, they'll open up. But now I'm thinking about it and going, well, isn't that part of being manly? Part of being manly is being courageous, that if you have something to say, you don't need to bully it, but say it in a respectful way. If you're not given a safe space, anyone can do anything in a safe space. Real courage is not about whether it's safe or not, because it doesn't require courage. So is it something that we need to be encouraging boys and men? Hey, if you've got something to say, yes, do it respectfully, but you need to speak up, not just wait for a safe space.
100%. That's bravery, right? That's
Yeah.
bravery, being able to do that. But I don't think it comes at the snap of a finger. It comes
No,
with practice,
no.
right?
And you know that from the groups that you were associated. I mean, you mentioned about being around AA and those kind of things, where you help encourage that strength.
Right.
But are they the conversations we should be having under the be manly aspect of going, hey, yes, you need be part of being manly is having that courage, intelligence to actually do things in a respectful way, but do what's right for you.
Yeah. I think that's a conversation we should definitely have. Yeah. I
How did you
think
do? How did you make that transition? Because I get the feeling from talking with you that if you've got something going on now, that you have no problem telling people. Is
it
that fair to
comes
say?
for me. That is fair to say. I'm always trying to be considerate of people's feelings. We're all human beings.
Mm-hmm.
But if something is, you know, if there's something that happens that needs to be addressed,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that needs someone to step in. From years of training, look, I do jujitsu where I have guys trying to strangle me and choke me, and I'm uncomfortable all the time. And I do things that I stink at swimming,
Mm-hmm.
but I put myself in a position where I try to swim all the time because it makes me uncomfortable and I try to overcome it.
Mm.
So when I train like that, and part of my life is like that, then when situations arise, it's not this huge thing that has to happen. I'm
Mm.
used to it. I'm not saying everybody has to live my life, but when we get off the air tonight, this may sound crazy to some people. I'm going hunting for my dinner. I'm going hunting and I'm filling my freezer with my dinner. And I'll be doing that out in the woods in the dark and everything because that brings me peace. So I'm uncomfortable there. Little slices of things I do in my life allow me to step in when there needs to be someone to step in or there needs to be a voice or an advocate for someone.
Mm. I love that. I love that. Tell us about this process of writing your book. I mean, obviously you started, writing when you were in hospital, if I heard correctly. What was
Great
that like?
question.
You said you'd never written anything before in your life.
So it's not 100% true that I've never written anything before. Maybe I haven't written anything good before. So when I was on tour with
I can
artists,
imagine that there was maybe some graffiti when you were younger.
exactly. When I was on tour and I was on all those plane rides, I started jotting down. I said, "What can I can watch a movie here, or I
Mm,
can try to do something positive and do something creative." So I started writing down stories and events of my life, and I
mm,
started not knowing where they'd ever go, but I
mhm,
just knew I didn't want to veg out on a plane after plane after plane, and it kept my mind creative. So I started writing about what it was like to be with this person on tour, to do this, or where I grew up or stuff. And it was therapeutic for me.
mhm.
Now, I spell so bad that spell check goes, I have no idea what you're trying to do here.
I relate.
So I had a bunch of stuff written down on my laptop,
I
and I
make
was
up
like,
words.
exactly, like Gumpy.
Exactly. I was part of Toastmasters and I used speeching. And then I used it a couple of times and we had an area manager there and then she used it and it's now become used regularly. So it's kind of, my aim is to get it in the dictionary.
I love it. I petition for that. So here I am. I'm frozen. Like I can't move, and so I'm a person that it's hard for me to sit still. I'm always trying to do something.
Mhm,
So through trial and error, I'm like, what can I do? I need to rest for a couple minutes. I've been trying to move my fingers all day. So with my mind, I started going, okay. It dropped upon the fact that I had written these just blogs or whatever in my input in my laptop. And I
mm,
said, okay, this is something I can positively put my mind to. And I had a fantasy of maybe putting in a book, but I also had self-doubt where I was like, who would want to read this? This is ridiculous. Who would want to know
mm,
about this? Right. So
mm,
insecurity about it. And then when I started putting stuff together, I'm like, oh my God, this is not good. But at one point I just said, part of my friends, I just said, fuck it. I just said, fuck it. And I put music on that was kind of conducive to the emotion of what I was writing. And I
mm.
didn't judge what I was writing. And I
Yeah.
just started writing and I started putting stuff together. And in between trying to move and doing therapy, that's what my time, I consumed my mind with that. And then before you knew it, I had 70,000 words and then 80,000 and then 90,000 words of stuff I wrote. And I
Mm,
didn't judge it. I don't have any special skill in writing. If I can do this, you can do it.
mm,
And as I said, it went out. I had someone help me, Scott Burr, who his author, well beyond my knowledge, that was inspired by my story. He helped me edit everything and he became a co-author. But 90% of the stories, 95% are all from me, and he massaged it and it became a number one bestseller. I
mm.
mean, I literally want just if there's a message for me to get through on what is manly here is that if I can do this, you clearly can do 10 times more than I can do. You
Is it
clearly,
that moment where you went, fuck it, I'm going to do this? Was that your Pringles moment when you became a man?
I think it's a moment in my adulthood and my manhood. I feel like my Pringles moment was when I told them I would not cash those checks at 21.
Ah,
But this was definitely a milestone. We have layers as human beings, and I
yeah.
think it was a different layer where I was just exposed and vulnerable, and I didn't have my
Mhm.
physicality anymore. I had lost 30 plus pounds. I was frail. It was trouble just even bending my legs, and I just said, "Fuck it." What else can happen? What can happen? So what if someone doesn't like this? So what if they think it's a joke? What do I care?
Yeah. And is that what, when we look at being manly, courage is? Regardless of what anyone else thinks, you're just going to do what it is right for you and put that out there.
Very possibly could be one of the definitions. You need to do what needs to be done.
I love it. John, I know we've talked longer than we anticipated, and I know you've got food to get. So if you can sum up, what would be a key takeaways, your choice? What would be that nutshell that you'd want the audience to take away from this session that we have together? And no doubt, I can already tell we're going to have more discussions in the future. But for this one, what would it be that you would want them to take away?
This is coming to me, and I hope I can articulate it correctly, but we talked about a lot of different moments in my life. And if you took a snapshot of my life at certain points, you would say, this guy's a scumbag, he's no good, whatever. If you took other snapshots, you say this guy's courageous, or wherever you would define me. But no one snapshot defines your life. If you feel like you've done stuff and you're not proud of it, you have shame with it, or you're not happy, there is tomorrow. We can't live in the past. We can only learn from the past.
Yeah.
So wherever you're sitting right now, just know that you always have room to be better. You always have room to contribute. And that thing that you did in the past doesn't define you as a human being. We can only move forward. So that's my message. Whatever it is, let it go. Help create, and the more that you contribute, the more will come back to you.
I love that. That's awesome. John, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show, such a pleasure meeting with you. I'd love to have some further discussions going forward. I'm sure we will. We definitely will. I can tell. But it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time and sharing with the audience.
Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate it, and I would love to take you up on that. And I appreciate you giving us a platform here to get a message out. And if we help one people, I feel like my heart is in a better place.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.